This did not start out as a golf book at all. I blame my book designer entirely for persuading me to select that image for the cover of my book about my family history. And the more I look at that and learn about the picture and the process of the picture, the more fascinating the story of the golfing connections of the three Perthshire brothers has become for me. And it's particularly appropriate for me to be in St Andrews because, as you can see here, the photograph is by Thomas Roger, St Mary's Studio, St Andrews, which is now, I think I'm right in saying, the University Careers Centre, just round the corner, which is where Roger, who was really the first professional, successful photographer after Adamson in the town, and he made quite a name for himself, including with royalty. I've only learned that this week, post getting the slides to Hannah. But that's why I'm here. It was never intended to be a golf book, and I've been persuaded by David and others to go down various rabbit holes to produce a talk for 40 minutes to this audience. And thank you so much for coming. I appreciate being invited. I got into the golf bit through the British Golf Collectors Society. I was asked in October to give a very brief talk to the literati of the links, who are writers about the history of the game, David being one of them. And they produced this wonderful magazine quarterly called Through the Green, and I can't commend the journal enough, and I can't commend the British Golf Collectors Society enough, because they're doing a huge amount for educating people about the history of golf in the UK and abroad. So this is if anybody wants to look at it later, it's wonderful, and my article is wonderful in there too. And very generously they've given me a nice review of the book. So I'm hoping to skip through various points, how my research came about, and it goes back to 1993. The family background for the Grants of Kilgraston. They came from Strathspey, went to Jamaica, back to Edinburgh and Perthshire. And then a bit about the three brothers, John, who was the Laird of Kilgraston, Hunter, golf in Perth and St Andrews, and his connection with the wonderful golfers painting, connection with the Elgin Marbles and golf at East Lothian. Sir Francis Grant, who was president of the Royal Academy of Arts, first Scottish and only Scottish president, and General Sir Hope Grant, cavalry officer, cellist, and very accomplished golfer in the 19th century. And then, if there's time, a little bit about other golfing connections with Muirfield, Archerfield, North Berwick, Royal Blackheath, London Scottish. So it all started here. Some of you from Perth, I know, and if I can get this to work, this was my office opposite the museum. This is the old Perth Bridge. This I found in the National Library of Scotland in one of Francis Grant's day books as opposed to sketchbooks, and we don't know whether it's by him, but it was a recent acquisition, and I rather liked it because I walked across that bridge for too many years of my life. And in 1993, we had a significant flood in the River Tay, and my office was submerged with 2.5 feet of very mucky water in the strong room where a lot of the records were kept. And from the depths of the water came this pristine 1787 receipt signed by the Governor of the Bank of Scotland for the price of Kilgraston, and that I put to one side, and that was the spark for my eventual research into why did the Grants buy Kilgraston, where did they get their money, and what happened to it, because it certainly didn't come down to the family. So the transition from Thomas Rogers' lovely composed photograph, and I've got that down as 1860, and I've never altered the slide, and I was told that it can't have been 1860 because Hope Grant was busy burning the Summer Palace in Peking at the time, so it must have been 1861. But since I started digging a bit more this week about Rogers' studio, I think it must have been post-1866, which was when the studio was rebuilt in St Mary's Place, and there are copies of the architect's drawings in the National Gallery of Scotland, showing quite an extraordinary layout for an early photographic studio, and you can see that on the NGS website. The book designer then managed to change this to what might have been Victorian colouring, Victorian clothing, and the reason I'm here is these 3 golf clubs, 1, 2, 3. Carefully composed by Roger in his studio, 3 golfers in St Andrews, John, Francis, Hope, and their surviving sister Catherine. And what is unique about the 3 brothers is that 2 of them were captains of 3 Royal golf clubs. We've got John at Perth in 1840, but the year before he'd been captain here at the R&A, and then Francis, a few years later, was captain at Royal Blackheath. I suspect it's possibly unique. David might tell me I'm wrong, but I can't believe that there are very many brothers who were in that situation. But they also had connections with other 19th century golf clubs, North Berwick, and we'll come on to that, Royal North Devon through General Hope, and London Scottish Golf Club, which was the great competitor of Royal Blackheath in the mid-19th century. Just for convenience, most of you will have a copy of the family tree, and just to show where everybody comes in, these 2 made their money in Jamaica and brought it back to Perthshire. John is the laird, he's the captain of the R&A, Sir Francis Grant, president of the Royal Academy, and General Sir Hope at the end here. Catherine was a surviving sister, and there were 3 predeceasing siblings. These were the 2 brothers who made their money. John on the left was Chief Justice of Jamaica, having been in Nova Scotia to start with. He probably went from the UK in his mid-teens, made a name for himself in the legal profession in Jamaica, and my next talk, in fact, at the Faculty of Advocates is meant to be about him, but I've got to get my head around that. Francis Grant was the one that made serious money in Jamaica and brought it back and left a trust after his death in 1818 that kept Kilgraston afloat for 30, 40 years before the money ran out. The 3 predeceasing children, I put this in really because this lady married a Lindsay of Balcarres, and the Lindsays at Balcarres obviously had St Andrews golfing connections. Robert in the middle, he died at St Helena. He was in the guard of Napoleon in exile, and then Henry died. All 3 of them died of consumption within 3 years of each other. I think for the story about the 3 golfing brothers, we have to see how much wealth their father, Francis, left at his death in 1818. And the main points, I suppose, are that there was a huge sum just sitting on deposit in the bank, £15,000. And then we have here sugar and rum in Glasgow and sugar and rum in London. And this left out the estate value of the estate in Kilgraston and the value of the estate in Jamaica, but probably conservatively today might have been worth £6 million. So the sons had a big inheritance, and it was a question of whether they spent it wisely or not. John inherited the estate under entail, which meant that it had to go down through a specific line, bought another estate up in northern Perthshire. Robert died, Henry died, Francis spent his within 4 years on paintings, horses, and extravagant living, and Hope was slightly more sensible but paid a huge amount of money for a commission into a cavalry regiment, £5,000, 9th Lancers. They were brought up partly in Edinburgh and partly in Perthshire, and I put this in because we have here Brunsfield Links. We have here George Square, which until 1813-ish, the children were brought up. This would have been totally undeveloped. This is Marchmont and the meadows here. Walking distance to Brunsfield, where they may have watched golf, possibly played. David has said to me that they're more likely to have learned their golf down at Leith Links down here. But there obviously was also a golf ground at that time on Carlton Hill up here. certainly until it was shown on this map of 1817. White House is where, from 1818, Francis Grant's widow lived. So again, for the younger children, when they lived here, it was very close to Brunsfield. And here we are, Brunsfield as it was, and a very short distance across the meadows to George Square and to the White House further south. And I thought I'd put this in because I love it. It's a J.W.M. Turner sketch from Brunsfield Golf Ground in 1818. And Turner and Sir Francis Grant had a mild spat in about 1831 and never got on very well since then. But it was interesting that Francis Grant became president of the Royal Academy and Turner didn't. That's Kilgraston, and one or two of you will be familiar with that. It hasn't changed much since this is an engraving from a painting from 1820. Very similar now to what it was. Some of the detail of the windows changed post-fire in 1872, but otherwise, and there's extra rooms in the attic here, but otherwise it's much the same now as it was. And here are the three brothers. John, the laird, he was in the Grenadier Guards. I don't think he ever saw service, let alone active service probably, but he liked dressing up. Francis was very good at self-portraits. I think he was very keen on looking at himself in the mirror. And General Sir James Hope, who was the quiet one, deeply religious, the golfer, highly accomplished musician as well. Winters were spent hunting, as an awful lot of the early moneyed golfers would do. They would hunt in the winter and play golf in the summer with the same people that they hunted with. These are the three brothers down at Melton Mowbray in Leicestershire, and the painting is by Fearnley, one of the famous horse equestrian painters, but it's believed that Francis Grant actually painted the three portraits when he was probably 26 or 27. So on to the golfing part of it. In Balfour's reminiscences, John and Francis were not great golfers, but very fond of it, and were both excellent company. And I think the excellent company probably was in some ways more important than the quality of the golf back in 1840, 1850. Certainly for the people that came across from Perth to play on the links at St Andrews, they'd come over for 2 or 3 days, stay over, and they would entertain each other over meals and on the golf course. And a little poem here about John, the laird and the captain of the club. He was obviously not captain because of the quality of his golf. But for John Grant, a clever fellow too, I really fear that golf will never do. 'Tis strange indeed, for he can paint and ride, hunt the hounds and many a thing beside, amuse his friends with anecdotes and fun, but when he takes his club in hand, he's done. But then he changed his tune. Stay, I retract. Since writing the above, I've seen him play a better game, by Jove, so much beyond what one could have believed that I confessed myself for once deceived. And if he can go on the season through, there's still a chance that he may really do. But I think he wasn't all that competent. I wanted to bring in James Condy. I worked in the successor firm to Condy's firm in Perth, which is why I found the receipt from 1787 and various other Kilgraston papers. But he was the Grant's trusted man of business, and Anne Grant, who was John Grant's mother, wrote to John in Switzerland, "Worthy Mr. Condy and myself have been very busy in attending in every point. Interest, bills and expenses so accumulate that you must be economical for 1 year." Now Mr. Condy, James Condy and his son George are very important men in the Victorian history of golf, and David will know far more than I do about it, but James Condy was a multiple medal winner both in Perth and here in St Andrews, and he went to North Berwick and he went to Blackheath. He was all over the place. I suspect lawyers these days, even by reputation, possibly otherwise, don't have the time to spend that much time on the golf course. But he was a busy man, and I suspect through his golf, his business interests built up and built up and built up, and certainly his firm in Perth at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th centuries was possibly the biggest estate managing firm of solicitors in Scotland, certainly north of the Forth. Here's John. This is the captain's photograph in the Royal Perth. Unknown photographer, but possibly Roger. And he was known as an institution. He never got knighted, unlike his two brothers, but he was known the length and breadth of the United Kingdom. And here we are, captain of the RNA and RPGS, and he was first patron of Dalton Castle Golf Club. Come on to that shortly. He was captain of the Royal Perth when the famous button controversy was nearing conclusion. The stock of the original royal buttons had run out, or the die had ceased to work properly, and there was a proposal put to change the buttons of the club, and it was virtually a 50-50 split, with 50% of the members threatening to resign if the buttons changed, and 50% of the members threatening to resign if the buttons didn't change. So he managed to demit office before the decision was taken. And as it happens, I think next month is the bicentenary of the founding of Perth Golfing Society, not Royal Perth. The Royal comes in the 1830s, so another few years until the bicentenary of the Royal. And that is why the British Golf Collectors Society devoted much of this edition of their journal to Perth, and that's a lovely photograph, image of a painting of the North Inch on the front and back covers of this. North Inch shown on here, but before golf was played on the North Inch, it was played on the South Inch, and that is rather a nice early watercolour, and you can see the cattle, and from the history of the club, it's clear that the course had no more than minimal care, the only stipulation being that on medal days, fresh holes had to be cut and the cow droppings removed. That's what golf was about. Certainly in Perth. Most, if not all of you, will know the famous painting of the golfers by Lees, and I'll come back to this because it's quite important in the Grant story. But here's John Grant, the laird, holding his betting book, as is Murray Belsh's here. These are the Perth money men who used to come and take bets on the golf games for quite a lot of money. And I suspect that's quite a lot of where the inherited wealth of Kilgraston disappeared to. But it's quite significant that he's standing right in the middle of the picture, and I'll come back to that. He used to traipse backwards and forwards from Perth to St Andrews, certainly during his captaincy, but before and after as well. And here he is. This is a sketch by John, because he was a very talented amateur artist. And for any of you that know the Cooper to Perth Road, that is trying to be Mugdrum House, and that is Kinfauns Castle across the Tay. And he's saying Cooper Post horses a lesson in patience, and at the bottom here I think it says late for dinner again. This is a little watercolour that I found in a scrapbook which my uncle still has, and the writing is by John Grant, and it says from a photograph. And I think that when I spoke to the golf writers in October, I think they were quite interested in this, because it seems to mark a turning point between having to paint a picture from real life and being able to paint a picture from a photograph. So the photography kit would have been taken to whichever hole that was out on the links. Photographs taken, glasses taken back to whichever studio, whether it be Rogers or whether it be John Grant's, because he was a very talented amateur photographer as well. Developed, and there it was, and he could paint at leisure. So I think it's quite an interesting development in the middle of the 19th century. The Honourable William Drummond, Viscount Strathallan. The Drummonds were the Earls of Perth, and their family seat was Strathallan Castle, but that got sold, and then they moved to Stob Hall, which was sold as well. As well as being a photographer, John Grant always had his sketchbook. I don't know where this is, but there are various sketches of life in St Andrews around 1840. Rather charming sketch, possibly North Street, possibly further up towards the harbour. very basic life. Some of these people lived in 1840. And the Grants, certainly in 1842, took a house here. We're at the moment, we're about here. Museum's somewhere there. So this was known as North Bell Street in the 1840s, but now is Greyfriars Gardens, I think I'm right in saying. And here is where Roger constructed his studio in the 1860s. So everything was very close, and a lot of the photographs that Roger took of golfers would have been further down here. And thank you, David, for that email about the trees, which are further down at Peelmoor Cottage, I think you said. So that's quite an interesting little a little map there, short walk to the links. And I put this in because John Grant was instrumental in getting the Westport rebuilt in the 1840s. It was falling down, and the buttresses were rebuilt, and the coats of arms on either side, the west side and the east side, were put in by John Grant in, I think I'm right in saying 1843, but I stand to be corrected. Another legacy of John Grant is his bunker on the 16th. I suspect he always managed to find his way into that. And his second wife, this is important in the golfing history, his second wife was the youngest daughter of the 7th Earl of Elgin of the Marbles, and this lady is the Countess. She was the wife of the 7th Earl. They had an acrimonious divorce. Youngest daughter married John Grant, second wife. His first wife died in childbirth. And there's the Earl of Elgin, and there's the Countess's second husband, Robert Ferguson, from Wraith Estate at Kirkcaldy. And I suspect the Fergusons probably had golfing interests as well. Haven't got into that research yet. And I believe that the 5th Earl was a founding member of the RNA, so I thought I'd put a slightly pompous-looking portrait in. And the reason that the importance of the Bruce connection is that the eldest daughter of the Earl of Elgin inherited through her mother, Mary. This is the elder sister, Lady Mary. She inherited Archerfield eventually. But it wasn't until the 1830s, I think, that John Grant and his wife Lucy went down to Archerfield for the first time, met up with Lucy's mother, because part of the divorce settlement had been that the Countess of Elgin was not allowed to see her children until they reached the age of 21. Seems a bit cruel. Mary married this gentleman who constantly had to change his names because various estates kept landing on his plate. But you'll see, for anybody who's followed any of the slavery controversy in Edinburgh with the memorial in St Andrew's Square, the Dundas Memorial, or monument I should say, is a relative of the Dundas of that monument. He married Mary of Archerfield, and he, as you can see, was captain of North Berwick, member of the RNA, and subsequently captain of Royal Blackheath. So he had a significant golfing interest as well. This is the east front of Archerfield. Many of you will have seen that from playing the course at Archerfield, which back in the day, in the first half of the 19th century in particular, was a private course on the estate. And there's a view down to the Lamb and the Bass in the distance. So Dalton Golf Club was formed and was allowed to play on the Archerfield private links as long as there was a connection between the members of the club and the estate in some way. Changed its name to Archerfield Golf Club, and Henry Nisbet Hamilton was the first patron. Silver medal was presented by Mrs. Nisbet Hamilton, and then annually a full set of Tom Morris's best was presented as a prize for one of the competitions. And here's a meeting of the Archerfield Golf Club at the Castle Hotel. Many of you will have had a pint and a sandwich in there on the green in that lovely village. The Dalton Castle Golf Club was the third oldest artisans golf club in Scotland, Carnoustie and St Andrews being just before, and John Grant, being the well-kent ex-captain of the R&A and the Royal Perth, presented the Patrons Medal to the club, which is still played for. I'd hoped to have a photograph, but I haven't yet been provided with one by the current secretary, but having believed to have been lost, the medal has apparently turned up again. North Berwick, we'll come on to the famous painting of the North Berwick Golf Club, but you can see here how the Grants were involved. Early members, Hope and Francis. Hope won a medal, and then John became a member, and Mr. Condy became a member, and Lady Lucy Grant's nephew Robert was a medal winner in the 30s as well. Huge Grant connection. And for those of you who know the lovely links at North Berwick, and it is a very special golf course, it was constantly outgrowing itself and had to expand westwards in, I think, 3 different chunks. And this was the first expansion, and that was the Archerfield March Wall that is played over at the 3rd and the 16th. Still there, thankfully. As well as Archerfield, the Gillen Golf Clubs, or Gillen Hill, was on Archerfield Estate, and up here in 1830s, the race ground was more important than the golf links. And there were, up on Hill Road, up here, there were a number of racing stables, and it wasn't until the 1880s that there was quite a, for me as an ex-lawyer, quite an interesting Court of Session case, which went the way of the estate in that all the stable operators were told to go somewhere else because golf had precedence over Gillen Hill. Golf and the Rabbit Warren. The Rabbit Warren was very important, and you'll probably see that on many old links maps, that rabbit warrens would have been let by the estate, so that the rabbit trappers would come in and trap hundreds, if not thousands, of rabbits, and they would be sold to the local estates and to the local butchers. So part of the hill was the rabbit warren, and then we've got down here, of course, now Lough Ness as well. Gorgeous golfing country. So on to Sir Francis, who was the second surviving brother. We think that's probably around about 1830s. His first wife died in childbirth. She was a Farquharson of Invercould up at Braemar, and also a neighbour of the Grants in Charlotte Square in Edinburgh. So there was a very close social connection there. His parents wanted him to be a lawyer, like his uncle John, the Chief Justice, and that's the Old College. For anybody who knows the Old College in Edinburgh, it doesn't have its dome in 1819. That was a late 19th century addition. But Francis Grant studied law briefly, and there's a wonderful story that he hated it so much that one morning he burnt his law books in front of his professor and basically sacked his professor. We don't know whether that's his professor, but we suspect it might be, because that's a little early sketch by Francis Grant. Thankfully, he didn't proceed with the law because he became a hugely important 19th century artist. He's principally known for his equestrian paintings and his portraits, and I drove up what I would call cross-country, the quicker way today, which I don't know the road very well, coming into Cooper from the south. And I particularly wanted to see, I was told by very good friends who live in Fife, that this was probably painted near Hill of Tarvit, looking west with the Lomans. So that is very possible, because here we have Whyte-Melville, early captain of the R&A, on his Hunter, and here's John Grant here. And I think this, I don't know the name of this monument, but there's one near Cooper. Some people here will know which monument that is, I'm sure. Whyte-Melville will crop up again later, but an awful lot of John Grant's paintings were of his hunting friends / golfing friends / social friends. They were lifelong friends, the Whyte-Melvilles and the Grants. As was J.O. Fairley, a very important member of the R&A, and I just had confirmed to me by Kieran that the portrait of J.O. Fairley, which you'll see in a second, has been or is being rehung in the refurbished clubhouse. But again, horses by Fernley, but very probably portraits by Francis in 1840. You'll be familiar with this one from the R&A. Unknown artist, and that was confirmed again just before the talk. I have a hunch, and it's no more than a hunch, that it could have been by Francis Grant. They were very close friends. There is nothing in Francis Grant's Sitter's book to record a painting such as this of J.O. Fairley, but any paintings that he did for friends or relatives tended not to end up in his Sitter's book, because that was for the taxman. Had prices of paintings beside the sitters' names. So I put this in because this is what's known as a conversation painting. This hangs at Gosford House on the way to North Berwick, and Francis Grant and Lord Elcho were great hunting friends, and this was one of the very early paintings that helped make Francis Grant's name, but it was painted in the same style and round about the same time as this, the first meeting of North Berwick Golf Club. And I think it is pretty widely accepted that this is one of the one of the first conversation pieces in this format, certainly on a golf course. And we'll see that's reflected in the golfers later on by Lees. I know that Alistair Loudon has suggested that this background might be by Naismith, but I've taken issue with Alistair over that, and I think it's more likely to be by the Reverend Thompson from Duddingston, who was a close collaborator with Francis Grant. A lot of sketches done at the time of golfers. This is one that's in the museum, or was last time I was here. I think that might be it, hanging on the wall there. And I put that in because we then go on to Charles Lee's two sketches, working sketches for the golfers. This one is up. It's up here, if anybody wants to see it afterwards. I think that's the first of the two sketches. And you can see, if I go back to, that we have some similarities here and here. We've got the ginger beer and we've got the golfers. And this is the second sketch, and we still have the ginger beer and the golfers. And there's the finished article, and we have the ginger beer here and the golfers. But if you just have a look at the background here, we've got St Andrews in the background, and we've got two golf games and another one here, as well as the principal one. And then if we look at this, which is a sketch of golfers at St Andrews by Francis Grant, unknown date. Here we have St Andrews in the background. Here we have 1, 2 golf games in the background. Don't know what the keys are, I'm afraid, but he obviously had keys for 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And here we have probably the ginger beer lady on the right, and here we have the golfer on the left. And I put into the ring in October at David's meeting of the golf writers that possibly this sketch might have influenced Charles Lee's The Golfers. They undoubtedly knew each other. Scotland was small enough, it still is small enough, but in the art world, Lees was from Cooper, Francis Grant brought up in Perth, or around Perth, and in St Andrews a lot. They were bound to have known each other. So might that have been something to do with Charles Lee's painting? I don't know, but it's a nice idea. There we are, back to that St Andrews. It's all very similar. And here's a close-up of the golfers with John wearing his Glengarry bonnet, betting book. There's another betting book here. And I've just marked Whyte-Melville in here. Captain, the Honourable William Drummond of Strathallan. I put in David Murray, who was the youngest son of the Earl of Mansfield, simply because he was the son-in-law of John Grant. And here's Mr. Condie at the back, the man of business surveying all his clients in the front. But why was he in the middle of that painting? Was it a nod to Francis Grant's influence? I'd like to think so. I also would just propose that possibly the golfers might have been partly based on photographs of some of the individuals. Certainly when this painting of the Disruption was eventually finished 20 years after it was started, this was based on individual photographs that Hill and Adamson had taken very early on of these individuals. And there, it's difficult to see, but there's the camera. Little nod in the painting to the camera. Francis Grant always had his sketchbook, rather a nice little sketch of somebody at St Andrews in 1860 on Union Club notepaper, sold for quite a lot of money very recently. And certainly locally, that will be the most famous portrait of Francis Grant's that I presume will be going back into its place in the clubhouse. Whyte-Melville, and I've just put in here that it's been a difficult journey for me to understand the Grant connections with slavery, but John Grant was not the only captain of the club to have slavery connections, because Whyte-Melville had that connection. But that's a very famous painting, and that, I believe, was a copy of the portrait owned by the family that was sold at auction in 1991 and again in 2012. No connection with Grant, but I love this. This is hanging up somewhere here too, but wonderful little sketch of caricature of Whyte-Melville. After golfing extraordinary on December the 10th, 1880, 2 rounds in a gale of wind at 83. Francis Grant was a serious portrait painter and royal connections. Here's Queen Victoria, and one of his trademarks that I think is so lovely is that it's very common to see a splash of colour in his portraits, and also dogs, if not horses. And you can see what Queen Victoria thought of him. Very good-looking man, was a gentleman, married a Miss Norman, spent all his fortune and now paints for money. 2 very much more personal portraits of 2 of his daughters, which I love, and very, very personal, very detailed, signature hands here, but we've got the splash of colour. Gorgeous. This one's hanging in the National Gallery in Edinburgh as I speak. I saw it the other day. It's on the first floor on the right. It's not in the Scottish bit. It's in one of the old rooms. So on to the third brother, Hope, General Sir James Hope. His niece, Mary, was a very talented sculptor, and this is one of her busts. Not only golf medals did he win, but he won all this lot as well. And if anybody knows the Flashman books, George MacDonald Fraser called him the best fighting man in the world in Flashman and the Dragon. Fearless, and he led from the front, and he cheated death probably half a dozen times in India in particular. This is in a very, very poor, it's not a biography, it's really a life from journals by one of his army colleagues. I have this words from Hope's journal. I have, I believe, played almost every game of the United Kingdom, but I've never seen any equal to the glorious game of golf. I've got up early in the morning and played till breakfast, which I scarcely gave myself time to finish, so keen was I to resume play. Then I used to set again to work and play till it was dark, when I was sorry that the daylight had failed, and that I had reluctantly been driven from my amusement. Play ever so well or ever so indifferently, everyone seems to feel the same excitement in the glorious game. There is an interest attached to each hole and to each club in your possession. These latter you oil and polish up and look at with the delight a fond mother does on a dearly loved child. If you explain your fine strokes to some friend, and if he takes no interest in them, you set him down as an Englishman and think of him with sorrow. Not sure we can say that now. And again, back to Balfour and his reminiscences. Hope was one of the keenest golfers I ever knew, and I've known few who played better. He drove long, low balls, held his cleek short, played it from the knee, and when he was in form was a very good putter, always using a wooden club which he held short. Used to play matches for £100 with John Wood, the best gentleman player then, or perhaps ever was, at Musselburgh. That might be £6,000 today, a lot of money. But there was obviously a turn in fortunes, because he obviously started to lose to Wood. Carnegie, whether the Ledger and the Derby pay as well as Hope Grant, I can scarcely say, but let that be. 'Tis better, John, old fellow, John Wood, old fellow, to pluck the rooks than rook the violoncello. Permit me just a moment to digress. Friendship would chide me should I venture less. The poor Chinese, there cannot be a doubt, will shortly be demolished out and out. But oh, how blessed beyond the common line of conquered nations by the power divine. Sultan to cut their yellow throats, and then Hope Grant to play their requiem notes. This is colonialism at its worst. Hope Grant was just about off with Lord Sultan to the first China campaign in the 1840s. And the story goes that he was selected by Lord Sultan because Sultan was a very keen violin player, and he needed a cello player to accompany him. That's how military men made their names. Here he is with his cello. So, a couple more rather nice photos by Roger. Here we have Hope. Here we have Fairley with his boys. And here we have Watty Alexander, who was Hope Grant's regular caddy. And Hope won medals here and at Perth, member at Blackheath, member at North Berwick, winner of the Glen Saddle at North Berwick, and a member at the London Scottish, where he'd been the honorary colonel of the London Scottish Regiment. Rather nicer, clearer photograph of Hope with Watty Alexander. When I was down at Blackheath recently, I was speaking to the historian for the London Scottish Golf Club, and he was convinced that these photographs were taken down at Wimbledon Common. But I said that was, he didn't know who the photographer was, and I said that was impossible. That would have been further down at Pilmoor, and he was disabused of that, so that was fine. Now, the Reverend Kerr was the other great golf writer. He had connections with Durlton. As to Hope Grant's style, it was extremely easy and neat, characterised by precision and steadiness rather than power, resembling Mr. George Glennie in this respect, but with a fuller, all-round swing. Like others of his generation, he was an effective Baffy player. So he was obviously well respected for his skill and his perseverance on the links, but above all, he just loved the game. And, you know, that's what golf's all about. So I'm told. And this is where the Reverend Kerr was minister, and the connection there is that this is the Archerfield Estate Kirk, the middle of Durlton village. Hope went to Royal North Devon very soon after it had opened, and he wrote to his brother John, "It is one of the finest links I've ever played upon. There are 18 holes with the finest putting greens imaginable and glorious bunkers." So they travel a long way to play their golf, and because he loved it so much, he presented this gold medal to the club the following year, and it is still played for in August every year. That is the Lancers, Royal Lancers crest on the medal. And he has left his name attached to hole 13 at the London Scottish Golf Club on Wimbledon Common. Hope together with his friend Lord Elcho from Gosford, donated the earliest competition medal at London Scottish Golf Club. And I believe that there is a bit of a tussle at the moment going on about who actually owns the medal, whether it is the original London Scottish or whether it is the Wimbledon Golf Club. Since my talk in October, I've been doing a bit more digging about Hope's golfing exploits, and I was really very keen to know whether he took his golf clubs on campaign, and I'm pretty convinced that he would have. And I was shown this letter, well, not the letter, but the quote from Wolfe Murray's letter from 1902 to the Golf Illustrated magazine. I'm now one of the oldest members of the Madras Golf Club, started originally, I believe, by Sir Hope Grant. So that would have been in probably 1860 to 1864 he was in Madras. So he definitely had his clubs with him then. And the 1842 minute book in Blackheath has a lot of correspondence about the formation of the Bombay Golf Club, and it refers to the possibilities of playing golf en route to Bombay between Cairo and the Suez Canal, and close to the Corinth Canal in Greece, where the Greek king had laid out putting grounds for the British en route to India. So 1840s golf abroad. It was earlier than that, I think I'm right in saying. David might keep me right on this. Royal Calcutta, one of the earliest, second or something. I was fortunate enough to be invited down to Blackheath recently. I didn't even know that it moved from Blackheath Common, which of course it did long time ago. But you can see from their redesigned logo the Scottish connections here, St Andrews connections, as well as the royal emblem. Fabulous clubhouse on the southeast side of London. And it has a wonderful museum. If you know anybody who will be able to understand the code to let you in. There is a very interesting article in here by Richard Williams from Royal Blackheath about the Scottish coup when they took over Royal Blackheath, changed all the rules to reflect Royal Perth, and basically got a Scottish committee up and running to run the place efficiently. And Francis became captain in 1846. Hope was briefly a member when he came back from the Second China campaign, and then transferred to London Scottish, where his brothers were also members. And he played in the inaugural match between London Scottish and Royal Blackheath, when word went out from London Scottish, get Hope Grant before Blackheath do. He was the one they wanted to get on their team to play number one. And I didn't know this existed until Richard Williams from Blackheath told me about it. Lovely portrait by Francis Grant in the dining room of Blackheath Golf Club of George Lindsay, possibly with a Scottish connection, but no close connection to Balcarres as far as I know, in the uniform of Field Marshal, which is a fairly ancient traditional position for, I think, the oldest surviving captain of Blackheath. I think I'm right in saying he's allowed 2 epaulettes rather than 1 if you're captain. I think I'm right, but I'm probably got that slightly wrong. But that was a complimentary portrait by Francis Grant after he had given up his presidency, and it was painted at the time that he was at the peak of his profession and very, very busy. I hadn't realised that when Blackheath played at Blackheath, they played over the pits at Blackheath. This is slightly later than when Francis would have played, but there's a nice little sketch of one of the holes. Francis never won a medal. I don't think he won a medal anywhere, not just at Blackheath, and his scores were generally between 150 and 160 over 3 rounds of the 7-hole course. Just as one example, in 1852, the medal was won in 141, so he was normally about 15 to 20 strokes behind. But on that day, among other participants, we've got R.A. Christopher from Archerfield, we've got Francis Charteris from Gosford, we've got the Anstruthers from Balcaskey, we've got Lord Duplin from Duplin Castle, and we've got one of the Balfours from Balbirnie. Most of the participants were from Scotland. They used to go and dine afterwards at the Trafalgar Tavern at Greenwich, which is still very much a busy pub. And I just took this, I thought it was lovely, in the 1852 minutes. Bets at the last dinner meeting, the spring medal, which are always 1 gallon of claret. Another connection with Kilgraston is Francis Abbott, one of the foremost late 18th century portrait painters. Many of you will be familiar with these two William Innes engravings of this hang in many, many golf clubs around the UK, certainly in Perth. And this was the first golf print to be published from a painting, I understand. I'm very willing to be corrected on any of this information. And roughly about the same time, calendar was painted both for Blackheath. You can see the windmills on Blackheath Common up here. Again, Francis Grant has got the lovely splash of colour in here. And the connection is that the two brothers at Kilgraston had their portraits painted by Abbott as well. John, round about 1791. Francis probably a few years later, because he didn't get back from Jamaica until 94. Kilgraston after the fire in 1872. We have Magnus Jackson, the Perth photographer, to thank for an awful lot of the surviving images of Kilgraston, both inside and outside. Tragic event, and there wasn't enough insurance, and it's the first crowdfunding that I've come across. One of the neighbouring landowning friends of the Grants started a crowdfunding campaign amongst the great and good, and they raised enough money to make up the shortfall for the insurance to have that rebuilt. But the Grants never went back to live in it as their main residence. They let it out, including to Charles Carnegie for his honeymoon, and they moved into a smaller house on the estate. For all their prowess, whether it be golfing or painting, the modest gravestones, Francis Grant's headstone in Melton Mowbray Old Graveyard, very simple. Hope Grant had a full military funeral in Edinburgh, and this is a slightly odd drawing by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's father, Charles Altamont Doyle, in 1875. But this is the meadows in Edinburgh, and this is the old Royal Infirmary with the very strange Edinburgh Castle in the background. But these are crowds of thousands of people, and probably several thousand military escorting the coffin from Waverley Station, along Princes Street, up Lothian Road, through the meadows, and up to the Grange Cemetery, where he is in a very, well, comparatively speaking, humble grave. John ended up in the Kilgraston burial ground, which is a very evocative place, certainly for me, because all the family memorials are there to be seen, and you can see that there are small graves marked out of the children who died in infancy. How are we doing for time? We got 5 minutes?
5 minutes.
Not strictly about the Grants, but just because of the Archerfield connection. Archerfield's up here. In the late 19th century, there were two possible sites for the Honourable Company to move out of Edinburgh. One down here near Belhaven. The railway line, of course, was out here, and one here near Delton, where the railway line was coming in as a branch from the North Berwick line. And of course, that was selected on Archerfield estate ground. And Muirfield in 1891 originally looked like that, but they, like North Berwick, had to secure additional ground from the estate, pushing north in 1912, and then north and northeast in 1928. And then they also bought a lot of the surrounding dunes going down to the foreshore. Archerfield sits to the west here. And on Archerfield estate, just, it interests me, having been brought up in East Lothian, here we have Gillan, here we have Muirfield, here we have the old Archerfield, here we have the new Renaissance and Archerfield links, and here we have the western sections of North Berwick links, all on Archerfield Estate. So quite an important part of the development of golf in East Lothian. And that's it. Happy to answer any questions, either here or afterwards, but I hope that has given you a bit of a whistle-stop tour through the golfing brothers.